Hi everyone and welcome to Nightmare Vault. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're diving into 7 stories from people who lived through truly terrifying moments in the Appalachian Mountains. From those who lived deep in the forest and came across things they still can't explain to others who had their homes completely broken into. These mountains are full of mystery, tension, and in some cases, cold-blooded killers. These are stories that have never been featured on this channel, so if you've been waiting for this video, thanks for sticking around. I'm glad you're here. Your support means everything. Every comment, every like, every time you just sit back and listen, it's what keeps this channel alive, so thank you for being here. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What he was about to recount happened about 2 weeks prior, and honestly, he still didn't really know what had happened or how, and definitely not why. He lived in West Virginia in one of the most remote parts of the state. Houses were pretty spread out there with tons of woods all around. It was quiet and peaceful. He loved living there. He loved nature and his routines. He had a regular job, a regular house, and that was more than enough for him. He lived a quiet life and was happy that way. Since it was a small community in a part of the country full of old stories, myths, and folklore, crime wasn't really a thing around there. It wasn't uncommon for people to go missing in the woods, and weird stuff happened sometimes, but he didn't think he'd ever heard of an actual house being broken into. Sometimes strange stuff went on, but it was forest stuff. Noises, movement, animals, nothing to do with real people, nothing dangerous. And when it came to what came out of the woods, folks around there grew up knowing how to deal with it. They learned from a young age that the forest plays by its own rules. The events he was about to describe happened 2 nights ago, the night he went to a party at one of his best friend's place. His friend and his friend's sister shared a birthday. They weren't twins, they were a year apart, but they were both born on May 15th. So every year they threw a big party together. The party was the usual fun, full of people they'd known forever and lots of drinking, but just to be clear, he didn't have a drop. He was known for being the responsible one in the group. He lived in an area with dangerous roads, dark, winding through the woods. He didn't touch any alcohol. The last thing he wanted was to end up in a ditch somewhere because he was being stupid. He was driving home that night and wanted to get there safe. He ended up leaving the party later than he'd planned. The drive home took a solid 38 minutes, all through the mountains. There were stretches where you couldn't see anything but your headlights, and at that hour you didn't pass a single soul. Since he was one of the only sober ones, he even took a detour to drop off 2 friends. That added another 15 minutes to the drive. It was no big deal. He knew those roads well, and he actually liked driving them at night. There was something relaxing about the total silence and complete darkness. The drive was smooth, like always, until about halfway through when he suddenly had to pee. If it had been daytime, he would have pulled over on the side of the road and taken care of it. But at night, in the middle of the forest, no way. He would only stop if it was absolutely necessary. Luckily, about 5 minutes down the road, there was a gas station where he could use the bathroom. It wasn't a place he liked stopping at. First off, he couldn't stand the guy who worked there. Rude, rough, always giving off this sketchy vibe, and he wasn't the kind of person who let people walk all over him, so he'd snapped at the guy before. Second, the station itself was creepy. It was in the middle of nowhere, barely lit, super old, and it just felt like the kind of place weirdos liked to hang out. But he really had to go. And honestly, between that and the woods, the gas station was the lesser evil. As soon as he parked, he headed straight toward the bathroom. On the way, he looked inside and saw the attendant nodding at someone, subtly motioning in the direction of his car. That made him uneasy. First, because he didn't see anyone else in the store, just him. Second, he remembered he hadn't locked the car. He thought about going back to lock it, but he figured he was just peeing. He wouldn't lose sight of the car for more than a minute. so he let it go. Right before stepping into the bathroom, he glanced back at the store. The attendant was staring right at him. Still no sign of anyone else inside. He even thought, half joking, maybe the isolation's getting to me. Maybe I've started imagining people. While he was washing his hands, he clearly heard a car door slam shut. It made his blood run cold. He rushed outside, thinking maybe another car had pulled in, but the lot was empty. His car was exactly how he'd left it. He sped up toward it, and the moment he got there, he looked inside. Front seats, back seats, nothing. He looked back at the store, and the attendant was still staring at him. He felt a shiver run through his whole body. He wasn't usually the type to get spooked. Living around there, you get tough to that stuff. He rarely felt threatened or scared, but something about that whole situation had him on edge. He got in the car and drove off. Next time, I'll just piss in the woods, he thought. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but he couldn't stop thinking about that weird interaction. The attendant's look, the nod, the car door sound, it was all a bit too weird, but maybe he was just on edge and overthinking things. When he got home, he pulled into the garage, locked everything up, and went straight to bed. He woke up around 3:40 a.m. to a noise. He stayed in bed listening, but didn't hear anything else. He tried to fall back asleep, but he had insomnia. He got up to use the bathroom, maybe grab something to eat. As he left his room, he noticed the door was slightly open. That threw him off. Had he forgotten to close it? Maybe, but it was unlikely. He'd had this weird thing since he was a kid. He couldn't sleep with the door open. He always closed it, almost automatically. Still, he figured he was just tired and brushed it off. After the bathroom, he started heading downstairs to the kitchen. To give a better idea of the house, it was 2 stories. Upstairs were the bedrooms, a bathroom, and the office. Downstairs, you walked into a small hallway that led to the stairs. The kitchen and garage were to the right, the living and dining rooms to the left. There was also a small bathroom next to the stairs, so he headed straight to the kitchen. At first, nothing seemed off, but then when he touched the fridge handle, it felt sticky. That was weird. He looked around. There were things on the counter he hadn't taken out, crumbs all over the floor, a chair out of place. That sinking feeling in his gut, the kind that feels like it's pulling you inside out, started growing. Someone had been there. Someone had been walking around his house while he was asleep. The memory of the bedroom door came rushing back. But how? How had someone gotten in? He had locked everything. He checked the doors. The house was secure. He went straight to the bedroom and grabbed his gun. Then, as calmly as he could, he started checking the house room by room. The feeling that he wasn't alone was unbearable. Every shadow looked suspicious. It wasn't even fear, really. It was more like this overwhelming sense of having his space violated, and the more he walked around, the more little things he noticed. Stuff just slightly out of place, barely noticeable but real. Someone had been moving around the house, touching his stuff. The obvious thought hit him. The alarm had been on. So, either the person was already inside when he got home, or they came in with him. Then he walked into the living room, and there he was, lying on the couch, some guy in his 40s, completely relaxed, sleeping like it was his damn house. He didn't say a word, didn't shout or ask anything. He pointed the gun straight at him and tapped the barrel on his head. The man opened his eyes slowly and looked right at him. No fear, no urgency. He just locked his eyes on his. He told the intruder, as calmly as he could, that the cops were already on their way, and if he didn't get out right now, he'd shoot. What freaked him out the most wasn't that the man didn't get aggressive. He was ready for that. He thought he might flip out or get violent, but no. What made him feel sick was how disconnected from reality the intruder seemed, like none of it was real to him. He got up slowly, didn't say a word, walked to the front door, opened it, and walked out. He shut the door the second the man crossed the threshold, locked everything again, and just stood there, trying to process what the hell had just happened. Obviously, he didn't go back to sleep. The next day, still in shock, he called one of his closest friends. He told him what happened, but only the part after he got home. He hadn't even thought about the stuff from earlier until his friend asked him to go over everything from the moment he left the party. And that's when it all clicked. He remembered the gas station, the attendant, and the nod toward someone, the car door noise he heard while he was in the bathroom. That's when he realized. He never checked the trunk. How could he have missed that? How could he have been that stupid? He went to the garage and opened it up. Nothing was out of place, but he knew for sure the guy had come home with him, hiding in the trunk. Why? That's what had been haunting him for the past few days. The weird part was that nothing was stolen. The intruder didn't look homeless. The only thing that made sense was that he was high, and that explained why he seemed so out of it. What pissed him off the most was thinking about the gas station attendant. He knew that guy knew something. He was in on it somehow. He was sure of it, and he knew one of these days he was going to lose his patience and confront him. What he was about to recount was, hands down, the scariest thing that had ever happened to him. And the craziest part was it had happened just a week ago, up in the Appalachian Mountains. It all went down with him and his two friends. They'd been tight since forever. He'd known them both for as long as he could remember. They were pretty much like siblings to him. About 5 years ago, the three of them started hiking together, and ever since then, it kind of became their thing. They would go explore different trails in these mountains every year. This time around, they were doing a stretch up in Maine. They'd never been to that area before, so two of them were super pumped. The other friend, however, had just gone through a breakup, like literally 3 weeks before the trip, and from what he'd told them, it had ended in a total mess. He wanted to do the hike to clear his head a bit, but even so, you could tell his mood was all over the place. The storyteller and their female friend did their best to keep things light, to lift him up, and sometimes they actually managed to get him laughing and talking. But by the end of each day, he'd always slide back into that same gloomy state. For 3 nights, they did everything they could. They told dumb jokes, tried to scare each other with creepy forest stories just to keep things light. But on the 4th night, man, the heartbroken friend was in a really dark place. That's when the storyteller decided it was time to pull out the bottle of whiskey he'd brought. He hadn't mentioned it before, partly because he knew his other friend wouldn't approve, and also because drinking in the middle of the woods is, well, not the smartest move. Your senses get all fogged up, and out there that can be the difference between life and death. But he knew his friend. This wasn't his first breakup. Actually, it was his third, and every time he'd fall into the same deep, miserable funk. So he figured, worst case, he'd let him drink just a little. That night, they were sitting around the fire talking about some YouTube video they'd watched about a camper who went missing near Black Mountain in Pennsylvania. The heartbroken friend had always been into that kind of spooky stuff, but even that didn't get a rise out of him. That's when the storyteller gave his other friend a little look, like stay cool, and went to grab the bottle. To his surprise, she didn't give him the look. You know the one. He thought she must have realized what he was trying to do. His friend's eyes lit up as soon as he saw the whiskey. Neither the storyteller nor their other companion had a drop. They wanted to stay sharp, but their friend drank and drank. At one point, he had to actually take the bottle away from him. But honestly, mission accomplished. It was like flipping a switch. He came back to life. He started laughing, talking, joking around again. And suddenly, the three of them were just having fun. It felt like the old days. It was one of those easy, goofy nights. And he was genuinely glad he'd packed that bottle last minute before leaving the house. They ended up heading to their tents a little later than usual. He already knew the next day was going to suck. His friend would be hungover and they'd all be wiped, but it was totally worth it for that one good night. Their tents were a bit spaced out. The spot they'd picked wasn't ideal, and that setup was just the most comfortable layout they could find. It took him a while to fall asleep, but he eventually drifted off, and then around 4 a.m., he woke up to the sound of a man laughing. He was so out of it at first that he didn't even register that it wasn't his friend. He just lay there half asleep, listening to this laugh echoing through the woods. Then suddenly, his female friend burst into his tent, whisper shouting that it wasn't their friend, that there was someone in the forest just a few steps away, laughing like a complete maniac. The adrenaline hit him hard. He snapped out of his fog, grabbed his gun, and just from the look in his friend's eyes, he knew she was freaking out. Which, honestly, who wouldn't be? They were in the middle of nowhere, high up in the mountains, in a place known for weird stories. And now there was some lunatic out there, laughing his ass off in the dark. He told his friend to go check on their buddy. Then he stepped out of the tent with his gun raised toward the sound. But he couldn't see anything, just pitch-black trees and that damn laughter. Sometimes it sounded super close, like the guy was right there between the trees. And then other times it felt further away, like he was running in circles around them. He yelled out that they were armed. The only response was louder, more high-pitched laughter. He yelled again, told him he wasn't messing around, but he just kept going, laughing and laughing. Sometimes it would stop and they'd get this dead silence, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, it would start again. They stayed up all night, just sitting there, totally freaked out, waiting for daylight. And as soon as the sun came up, they didn't waste a second. They packed their stuff and got the hell out. They knew they were just a few hours away from a small town, and that's exactly where they headed. After that night, none of them wanted to spend one more minute in those woods. A man, let's call him the housesitter, had been in the business for about 6 years. Sometimes he also took on pet-sitting jobs, but most of the time it was just house-sitting. He lived in Atlanta, Georgia, and usually only took gigs around there unless the pay was really good and they covered all travel expenses. In this particular case, the situation was different. One of his best friends, who lived in West Virginia, asked him to look after his house. They'd known each other since they were kids. They were alike and used to spend hours playing games together. And even though these days they only saw each other maybe once a year, he knew his friend's house pretty well. The story he was about to tell happened about a year ago when he agreed to house-sit for him. His friend was going to be gone for a week and didn't want to leave the house empty. He warned him a few times about what he needed to do to stay safe in that area, which, to be fair, he already knew from previous visits. Another important thing was that about 3 years prior, his friend was sharing the house with a roommate. The house-sitter had never met him, but from what his friend told him, he seemed like a cool guy. He worked in deliveries and was often gone for weeks at a time doing those long-haul trips. The week the house-sitter was staying there, he wasn't supposed to be home either. The thing about the roommate was that his schedule was unpredictable. Sometimes he'd be gone longer and sometimes he'd come back early. So before leaving, his friend gave him the roommate's contact info just in case. Meaning he'd never met him, but the roommate knew he was going to be there and he had his number. He was planning for a peaceful week. They lived in a quiet area surrounded by trees and with only a few neighbors. For him, it felt like a mini vacation, and he was honestly happy to have it. On top of that, he was trying to build his own website and launch a business, so he figured he'd use the time to focus on that. The first day went exactly like that. He stayed out on the patio, soaking up the sun and working on the site. Everything went smoothly. He even ended up going to bed earlier than usual, and the night was quiet. The next day, he was genuinely excited to get back to work. He'd slept well and felt full of energy. He went back to the same spot on the patio, but around 4 p.m., he thought he saw someone in the trees, like they were watching him. He immediately stood up and walked a little closer, calling out and trying to see if anyone was there. Maybe it was a neighbor who didn't know me and thought it was weird I was there. He wasn't thinking anything bad, but when he called a few times and no one answered or came out from behind the trees, he convinced himself he'd imagined it. Still, he went back to where he was and stayed alert for a while, but he didn't see anyone else until 6 p.m. when he closed his laptop and went back inside. He made himself a light dinner and once again went to bed early. The house had 3 bedrooms, so he stayed in the guest room. He put on Netflix and started a movie. He thought he must have fallen asleep halfway through because he didn't even remember how it ended. He woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of the front door opening and closing. He nearly had a heart attack. He was supposed to be alone, and the roommate wasn't supposed to come back that week, but whoever it was had used a key to come in through the front door, so it didn't even cross his mind that it wasn't him. His friend had already told him the roommate's schedule was weird. He stayed in the room, listening to the sounds downstairs. He thought about going out to introduce himself, but it was 3 a.m., and that felt off, so he figured he'd do it in the morning. The only thing he did was quietly get up and lock the bedroom door. He heard the person come upstairs and go into the bathroom. The upstairs layout was like this. Right at the top of the stairs to the right was the bathroom. Then came his friend's room, the biggest one. Then the roommate's, the second biggest. And at the end of the hallway was the room he was in, which also served as storage. The only reason the room was set up at all was because his friend's sister used to stay there a lot. Then he heard the person leave the bathroom and walk down the hall. There was a loud, sharp noise, followed by a door opening. It freaked him out. The sound had been loud, but he couldn't tell what it was. He heard footsteps in the room, first slow, then faster, almost frantic. It made him feel uneasy. He seriously considered texting the roommate, but again, it was his house and he was the guest. He figured he'd just introduce himself in the morning and ask what that noise had been. He tried to go back to sleep, convincing himself everything was fine. But then he heard the door open again. Footsteps in the hall and someone trying to open his bedroom door. He jumped up right away, sat on the bed, and said it was him, that his friend had asked him to stay there. He waited for a response, but nothing. He could tell someone was on the other side of the door. Besides, he hadn't heard them walk away. He said the roommate's name again. Nothing. Dead silence. Then he heard the person walk off and go back downstairs. That whole interaction was one of the strangest things he'd ever experienced. His friend had assured him the roommate knew he was coming and that he was a chill guy. That was anything but chill. He tried to sleep again, but he couldn't. He turned the TV back on and just let it play whatever was on, not really paying attention. He got up early and went out to the porch to keep working on the site. But this time, he couldn't focus. He couldn't shake what had happened the night before, and he was starting to worry the roommate might actually be weird. He wasn't scared he'd hurt him or anything, he just didn't want things to get awkward between them. Around noon, he went back inside to make lunch. The roommate still hadn't come out of his room, but he didn't think much of it. He'd gotten in late and had probably stayed up unpacking or something. He ate, then went back to his usual spot on the porch. But by 5:00 p.m., he still hadn't shown up. He started feeling uncomfortable, like maybe he was avoiding him. So he decided to text him, saying he was there and that there was leftover lunch. The reply came almost immediately. He said he wasn't home and wouldn't be back for at least 2 more weeks. A cold chill ran through his body. Whoever had come in the night before had used the front door with a key. Could it have been his friend's sister, some other relative? He rushed back inside, shut the door behind him, and went upstairs. Whoever it was had gone through the bedrooms. That's when he noticed something he hadn't seen that morning. Both his friends' and the roommate's bedroom doors had signs of forced entry. His pulse kicked up. He went to try his friend's door. It wasn't locked and the room was a mess. Clothes everywhere, stuff all over the floor. Someone had been rummaging through it. He called his friend right away, desperate to find out who else could possibly have a key to the house. His friend's words froze him in place. No one else should have a copy. He said he'd talk to the roommate and call him back. When he did, he confirmed it. The roommate said he hadn't given a key to anyone either. It was getting late and he was genuinely worried the person might come back. So he told his friend he'd stay 1 more night, but he needed him back the next day. Then he barricaded the door, moved a dresser in front of it, and dragged the couch to block everything. Then he shut himself in the room and just hoped no one would try to come in that night. Luckily, no one did. And the next day, his friend was back. The roommate returned the day after that. The house had clearly been searched, but nothing seemed to be missing. Whoever had gotten inside knew exactly what they were looking for. He stayed with his friend that night while they changed the locks and waited for the roommate to come back. To this day, none of them know who got in, what they were after, or how they managed to get their hands on one of the keys. This all happened when a young woman was 19 and still living in West Virginia. It wasn't that she didn't like that part of the country. She actually loved it, and it was home for a long time, but after what happened, and all the isolation she felt afterward, she really needed to get away for a while. She ended up moving to California and now only goes back a few times a year to visit her parents and her brother. At the time, she had 2 jobs, one at a convenience store and the other at a gas station. She worked mornings at the store and then did 3 evening shifts a week at the gas station. She'd go in around 9 p.m. and get off around 2 a.m. For those who don't know, West Virginia, especially the part she lived in, is super remote. Lots of mountains and dense forest. It can be absolutely beautiful during the day, but at night, straight up terrifying. The gas station she worked at was just off the highway, so they did get a decent amount of customers, but the road to her house was completely isolated. It took her about 35 minutes to drive home through nothing but woods. Because it was so remote and they had a lot of truckers stopping by, she never worked alone. It was always her or whoever was on shift, plus someone in the back working the kitchen, making basic meals for people on the road, simple stuff just to keep them fed. That particular Tuesday it was raining, which made the station feel even darker than usual. It was already past 1 a.m., and both the cook and she were just about ready to clean up and head out. The only good thing about Tuesdays was getting to leave on time. But right around 1 hour and 5 minutes, this man walked in. And the second she saw him, something just felt off. He looked like the kind of guy who hadn't left his house in days, maybe holed up in a basement playing video games. Not that there was anything wrong with video games, she loved them. That was just the vibe he gave off. He didn't look like a trucker or a tourist, he just seemed out of place. She asked if he needed anything, and he said he was hungry and was going to grab a table. Before walking off, he asked for a black coffee and a bowl of fries. He sat at the farthest table in the place, but he positioned himself so he was facing directly toward the counter, straight toward her. So even though he was in the back corner, he had a clear view of her the whole time. As she worked, she could feel his eyes on her. Every time she glanced over, still staring. They exchanged a couple of polite, fake smiles, but she wasn't going to lie, he made her uncomfortable. Not in a super threatening way or anything, because she definitely dealt with worse at that job. Some guys were way too forward, the kind that didn't know how to take a no. There had even been a time when another customer had to step in and tell a guy to back off because she clearly wasn't interested. So, compared to that, he wasn't the worst. But still, something felt off. She stepped into the kitchen and asked the cook how long the fries would take, and he told her he'd dropped the bag and had to make a fresh batch. She walked over to the guy's table, apologized for the wait, and said it wouldn't be long. She asked if he wanted his coffee now or preferred to wait until the fries were ready. He said he'd rather have both at the same time. She guessed she made a weird face because he noticed and laughed, saying he knew it was kind of a weird request. She smiled back and said she'd seen weirder, just trying to be nice. She was about to walk away when he asked if she lived nearby. A classic question. She gave her usual lie, said she lived 3 towns over. She never told strangers where she actually lived. Then he asked if she liked living there. She just gave a little shrug and said, "It's all right, not great, not awful, it is what it is." Then she excused herself, saying she had to check on something in the back just to get away from the conversation. When she came back with the food, he held out his hand and introduced himself. She just smiled, nodded, and went back behind the counter. A few minutes later, she heard a semi pulling into the lot, and for some reason, she felt a wave of relief. Just knowing there was someone else around helped. Around 1:30, the man finished eating. She dropped the check, just a subtle way to let him know it was time to go. Something about him was still bothering her. He paid in cash, said it was nice meeting her, and left. She felt instant relief watching him walk out, get in his car, and drive away. By the time it got close to 2 o'clock, they'd finished closing up and were ready to head home. The cook lived in the opposite direction from her. They locked the front door and each went to their cars. There were only their 2 cars in the lot. The cook's was closer to the entrance, so he got in, waved, and drove off. Hers was parked way in the back, as far from the door as possible. There were 5 trucks parked that night, so she'd had to leave her car all the way down there. She picked up her pace. It was pitch black in that part of the lot. The only thing still lit up was the vending machine. She had goosebumps everywhere. She jumped in her car, locked the doors, and tried to start it. Nothing. Tried again. Still nothing. That's when the panic kicked in. Her car had never failed her before. She knew it had to happen eventually, but seriously, out here at 2 o'clock in the freaking morning. Then she felt that pit in her stomach. Headlights turned on. She heard an engine start. A car pulled into the lot. She knew it was him. Without thinking, she called 911. She was sure he'd done something to her car. He had to have been waiting. But how did he know which car was hers, and what the hell did he do to it? When the operator picked up, all she could say was where she was and that a man was following her. By that point, he had pulled up right next to her car, smiling. He motioned for her to roll the window down. She knew she had to buy time. The cops were on the way, but they weren't here yet. She cracked the window just enough so he could hear her and tried to sound as calm as possible. She told him her car wouldn't start, and she had no idea why. He smiled and said not to worry, that he knew about cars and could help. He told her to get out and let him take a look. Her brain was racing, her palms sweating. She asked if he could just check under the hood first, see if anything looked off. She saw a flicker of something in his expression, maybe frustration, but he smiled again and said, "Sure." As soon as he walked around to the front, she called the cook as quietly as possible so the man wouldn't hear. The cook had just left, and she knew he'd get there faster than the police. She didn't know if the man realized what she was doing, but not long after, he came back around and asked again if she'd step out of the car. They both knew that wasn't going to happen. Then he bent down to grab something off the ground, something she hadn't even seen was there. And suddenly, the passenger side window exploded. 2 shards hit her cheek. She screamed that the police were coming and held up her phone. He grabbed her wrist and tried to yank her out. She was screaming like crazy, as if someone out there in the woods might hear her. Through her screams, she didn't even notice the cook's car pulling back into the lot, straight toward them. He jumped out and fired a shot into the air. That was enough. The man let go of her and bolted into the woods. He knew he couldn't get back to his car. The cook had blocked the way. He probably thought it was the cops. The police showed up not long after. She wasn't shaking as badly by then, but her wrist hurt like hell, and her cheek was stinging from the cuts. The officers were really kind and said they were going to catch him. She wasn't so sure, but 2 days later she got a call. They'd caught him trying to hitchhike a few miles away. Turns out he was from Jackson, Ohio, and already had 2 restraining orders out on him. Knowing he was caught and couldn't hurt her again definitely helped, but she still couldn't bring herself to live in such an isolated area anymore. She looked for jobs out of state and ended up landing a good one in California. It's been 6 years now. She doesn't know if she'll ever move back, but one thing's for sure, she's never working another night shift again. The story that follows happened about 12 years ago, but it's still one of the most disturbing and confusing things its narrator has ever witnessed. It didn't happen to her directly, but she was there. She saw everything. It was with a friend of hers, let's call her the hiker. They met when they were kids and stayed close over the years, mostly because they both lived near a huge forest. When they were younger, they'd spend entire summers exploring that place. Over time, their love for nature stuck. The hiker especially became a really experienced outdoorswoman. That summer, she wanted to hike a big chunk of the Appalachian Trail. She asked her friend to come with her, but she had just started a new job and couldn't take time off. So they made a plan. The hiker would start the trail alone, and a week later, her friend would meet up with her at a designated spot. She'd bring her new food, clean clothes, and take anything she didn't need back with her. That first weekend went great. The hiker's solo week had gone smoothly. She kept the pace she wanted and was feeling good. Their weekend together was nice, too. They were in a busier area but still managed to find some cool trails. But on Sunday, after lunch, her friend had to leave. She had work on Monday, and the hiker was going to keep going alone until their next meeting point. It was a simple plan. They'd meet Friday night or Saturday morning if she was running behind. But then, Thursday night around 11 p.m., her friend got a call from her. She used her satellite phone. Her voice was fast, nervous, almost paranoid. She said she didn't know if she could keep up the pace. Then she said maybe her friend shouldn't come that weekend after all. Her friend asked her several times what was going on, but she just kept repeating the same phrases. Nothing made sense. At one point, she suddenly changed her mind and told her to definitely come and to bring her mother's ruby necklace. She told her exactly where it was and, since her friend had a key to her place, asked her to go get it. Her friend was seriously worried. The whole call was off. She started thinking maybe someone was following her or she was having a mental breakdown alone out there in the woods. She asked if she should call the cops, but the hiker kept saying everything was fine when it definitely wasn't. So, before heading to the meeting point that Saturday, her friend went to the police. She told them everything, how off the call was, how genuinely concerned she was for her safety. She said it was possible she wouldn't show up. But she did, and she was totally fine, like nothing had happened. Her friend felt like an idiot and tried to talk to her about it, but the hiker said the call was normal, that she was overreacting. But she knew she wasn't. She knew what she'd heard. She asked why she wanted the necklace, and she just said it made her feel closer to her mom. That was it. The whole thing was strange and uncomfortable, but to anyone who hadn't heard that call, she was the one who seemed paranoid. The police definitely acted like she'd wasted their time or misinterpreted something. They kept hiking, even though something still felt off. During the day, the hiker seemed okay, a bit tired, maybe from bad sleep, but otherwise herself. Sometimes she'd space out, but nothing too weird. But that night, it all came back, no warning and no explanation. They were already in the tent when she suddenly got paranoid again. Said someone was following her. Then out of nowhere, she started laughing hysterically, but it wasn't happy laughter. It was wrong. Her friend thought maybe she'd eaten some kind of toxic berry or maybe she was taking something. Whatever it was, it scared the hell out of her. After that burst of laughing, she'd go completely blank, silent, like she was emotionally gone. Then she'd suddenly crash and fall asleep. Deep sleep. Her friend thought about heading back, but it was night. They were in the middle of nowhere, and she didn't trust the situation at all. She wasn't even sure the hiker could walk properly or if she'd bolt into the forest and vanish. She decided she'd sleep in her tent that night. She just had a feeling something was really wrong. While the hiker slept, her friend went through her pack. She looked for pills, substances, anything that could explain it. She found nothing. The next morning, she was normal again. A little slow to start, but as the day went on, she was back to her usual self. Her friend tried to bring it up, told her she wasn't okay and that they needed to leave, but she just insisted she was exaggerating, said she didn't remember anything, said she needed to finish the hike. So her friend told herself, tonight, I'm staying alert. If it happens again, I'm calling for help and getting her out of there. That evening, they set up camp again. The hiker said she was going to collect sticks for the fire. At first, her friend went with her, but halfway through, she realized it was a good chance to check her stuff again. She told her she needed to go to the bathroom and went back to camp. What she found froze her. There was a man, no clue where he came from, and he was putting something in her water bottle. Then he walked over to the hiker's bottle, opened it, and poured something in there too. She froze. The fear hit her instantly. She had no idea who this guy was or what he wanted, and she had nothing on her. She waited until he walked away, then sprinted back to the hiker. She was as shocked as she was, and from her reaction, it felt like she'd already suspected something was going on. They had to leave immediately, even if it was night. Someone was out there with them in that forest, and they had no idea what they were planning. They went back to camp, grabbed only their backpacks, and got ready to go. Before leaving, her friend tried to fake it. She spoke out loud like she was tired and didn't want to keep hiking that night. The hiker caught on right away and played along, saying they were just going for a short walk and would be back soon. They were trying to make it seem like they weren't actually leaving. It was their only shot. As they hiked, they definitely heard footsteps. The hiker looked at her friend right away. She heard it too. They picked up the pace as much as they could. Around 5 a.m., they made it to the start of a trailhead close to a more populated area, somewhere they could finally feel kind of safe. They called the cops right away. They told them everything. And that's when, accidentally, one of the officers let something slip. Turns out this wasn't the first report like this in that area. At least 3 similar incidents had already been reported, and 12 years later, the case is still open. And the man, he's still out there doing God knows what. A man who had been hiking all over different parts of the U.S. for about 13 years started right after his mom passed away. It was a time when he really needed to keep his mind busy, and he ended up falling totally in love with it. The isolation in some areas, the kindness of people in others, the landscapes, the challenges, everything became part of those moments. And over time, he learned to appreciate each one, even when someone kind of annoying or weird showed up and ruined the peace he was looking for. At least those people always gave him good stories to tell. But what happened to him 2 years ago in the Smokies? Well, that one didn't make for a good story, or actually, it's the one he was going to tell now. Even today, it's hard for him to think about it, because if he hadn't kept his cool and thought fast, he might not be here to tell it. A coworker of his owned a cabin up in the Smoky Mountains and usually rented it out to different people. Since they worked together, sometimes he let him stay there for next to nothing. That was actually his 3rd time at that cabin, and he loved it. Whenever he felt really stressed out or just wanted to go on a hike, he'd hit him up to see if it was available. It was the start of summer, which meant the Smokies were looking their best. He loved going during that time of year. He'd already been there for 3 days when everything started. Just to give a bit of context, the cabin was pretty isolated. It was rare to run into anyone, but it wasn't totally off the grid. It was actually just a few miles from a small town and relatively close to one of the more popular trails. So every now and then, you'd run into another hiker. 2 years ago, when he'd been there, he got a scare in the middle of the night when a couple knocked on the door, totally panicked because someone had been stalking them. He admitted he was pretty cautious at first, but they didn't have anything on them, and they seemed genuinely freaked out. They ended up having to call the cops because someone really was following them at night. That was the first time anything like that had happened to him, but he'd already heard a bunch of stories about that part of the country. So he always made sure not to take any unnecessary risks. He avoided going out at night, didn't do hikes that took him too far from the cabin, and always carried his gun. Even though he avoided going out at night, it wasn't like some hard rule. He had done it a few times, and that night, he was feeling kind of claustrophobic. His sister had called him to talk about a bunch of decisions they needed to make about their dad, and he just couldn't clear his head inside the cabin. So, he decided to take a short walk to a lake area that was nearby. It was a pretty chilled path, only taking about 15 minutes. It was already past 10 p.m. when he left the cabin and started walking toward the lake. The night was calm, full of the usual forest sounds. It actually felt good, and he was already feeling a lot better by the time he got close to the water. But that's when he saw them. These figures, or at least they looked like men, dressed head to toe in black, hoods up, throwing something into the lake. They were on a small boat, like a canoe or something, and whatever they were throwing in was huge. It looked super heavy, too, because one of them almost tipped over trying to get it overboard. He was still a good distance away, but since he wasn't expecting to see anyone, he didn't even realize he had his flashlight on. One of them looked straight in his direction. He turned it off immediately, but he knew they had seen him. He had no clue what they were doing, but he wasn't stupid. Whatever it was, it clearly wasn't good. It was the middle of nowhere, late at night. They were all in black and throwing something massive into a lake. Yeah, that was shady as hell. Right before he turned and started heading back, he saw the one who had spotted him pull out a phone and make a call. He had no idea what happened after that because he was already putting distance between them. He walked fast for about 5 minutes. He just wanted to get back to the cabin. He was feeling seriously on edge, but then he heard a sound up ahead. A branch snapped, and it wasn't the kind of snap that happens naturally. He didn't know how to explain it, but he just knew someone was there. He stopped immediately and pointed his flashlight, and that's when a man stepped out from behind the trees, and he realized this was way worse than he thought. Not only had he been waiting for him, but he had a black scarf covering his face. He didn't want to be recognized, and he was there to confront him about what he'd just seen. He quickly pulled out the gun he always carried and aimed it at him, telling him to let him pass. The man asked him what he saw, and he told him that if he let him go, he hadn't seen a damn thing. But if he didn't, then yeah, he saw everything, and they were going to have a real problem. He tried to sound as confident as he could, and he thought it worked because he backed off. He started moving away slowly, still aiming at him the whole time. Then he started running. He knew they'd come after him. That guy only backed off because he was alone. Once the other two got back from the lake, it'd be 3 against 1. At that point, he decided to change the plan. He wasn't going back to the cabin. He was heading straight for his car and then to the police. The hike, or more like the sprint back to the car, was rough. The woods were full of noises, and he had no idea where that guy was or if anyone else was going to pop out of nowhere. At one point, he was absolutely sure he was being followed, but he kept going until he got to the car. Luckily, there was one thing he always did when he went out to places like this, something he picked up from a true crime documentary that had stuck with him ever since. To make sure he always had a way out, he'd bury a box near the car in a spot easy to recognize with a gun, a burner phone, a first aid and emergency kit, and a spare key to the car. He was pretty sure that's what saved him. He dug up that box as fast as he could, grabbed the key, and jumped into the car. It wasn't until he locked the doors and started the engine that he finally felt like he could breathe again. He went straight to the police and told them everything. The next day, they sent a team to the site, and after seeing the cabin had been completely broken into, they got a warrant to search the lake. That was the first real confirmation that at least part of his story was true. Nothing was found. Those other two must have stayed behind to recover whatever it was they threw in. How they did it, he had no clue. Meanwhile, someone else broke into the cabin looking for him. He knew that at least one of them had seen his face, so he never went back to that part of the country. And honestly, he didn't plan to. He also didn't work at the same company anymore. He heard his coworker only just started renting out the cabin again, and apparently there were people staying there right now. No idea if they knew the story, but he doubted it. He'd never seen anything about it go public. What happened on that trip, what one hiker was about to recount, completely changed the way he looked at the loneliness of the mountains. Before getting into it, he wanted to make it clear they weren't some clueless group of amateurs. Still, he knew for a fact they weren't ready for what went down. He, his wife, and their friend had already done several stretches of the Appalachians together. It started as this casual thing, weekend hikes here and there. But over time, it became a real tradition. Those little weekend treks turned into full-on expeditions. Tougher trails, longer days deep in off-the-grid wilderness, cold nights, either in shelters, tents, or just under the stars. They'd done it all. Truth is, those hikes were a kind of therapy for all of them. He worked in tech, constantly buried under notifications and meetings. His wife was a nurse, carrying around emotional weight most people couldn't even imagine. And their friend, a high school teacher, seemed to always carry that quiet frustration of someone who's expected to be a mom, a therapist, and an educator to a bunch of teenagers, especially in a country that's been waging war on public education for years. So yeah, that week they had planned in the mountains of southern West Virginia, they were counting down the days. Just the three of them. No signal, no noise, just the forest and its sounds. The first few days went exactly as planned. They kept the pace they wanted, hit the parts of the trail they'd mapped out. They saw some truly breathtaking views and got to experience that pure, untouched silence you only get way out in the middle of nowhere. Setting up camp was second nature by that point. They all had their roles down. His wife handled food and always stashed it away from camp to keep predators away. Their friend got the fire going. He took care of the tents and water. It was like a well-rehearsed dance, each of them moving in sync. No rush. But everything changed on the third night. They were just finishing setting up camp, the sun already dipping behind the mountains. It was getting dark fast, and they were trying to beat the last bit of daylight. The air was cooling down, and the daytime sounds of the woods were fading, being replaced by the eerie nighttime ones. That's when she appeared. This woman just stumbled into their camp out of the brush like a ghost. Her clothes were shredded. Her face was this raw mix of fear and desperation. At first they freaked. They legitimately stepped back, totally freaked out by the sight of her. But it didn't take long to realize she could barely stand. Something was very wrong. She was filthy, her eyes sunken, her breathing quick and shallow. She kept begging for help, but her words were all over the place, saying someone was after her, that she was being hunted. It didn't make much sense. They couldn't tell if it was trauma, a mental breakdown, or maybe drugs. She just kept repeating the same stuff over and over. There was no one behind her, or at least they couldn't see anyone past the firelight, and they didn't hear a thing. It was obvious she was in bad shape. They warmed up some oatmeal with hot water and gave it to her. His wife, being who she was, sat down next to the woman, tried to calm her, figure things out. She ate, but like it physically hurt to do so. You could tell she wasn't hungry, she just needed something in her. Their plan was to wait till morning and hike out for help. No way they were going to risk wandering through pitch-black woods, not knowing where they were even headed. She eventually quieted down, kind of went into this blank, checked-out state. They figured they'd try to rest a little. They were just about to crawl into the tents when it happened. A man stepped out from the trees. Just appeared like he'd been standing there the whole time. None of them heard him coming. He had a gun pointed right at them, but he was staring past them, right at the woman. And he smiled. Not a kind smile. It was cold, twisted. Then he looked the hiker dead in the eye and said he just wanted the woman back. If they handed her over, nobody had to get hurt. He barely even acknowledged his wife or their friend. He just kept his eyes locked on him. That's when everything flipped. Their friend grabbed a burning branch from the fire and launched it right at his face. It was fast, pure instinct. The guy never saw it coming, especially not from her. He stumbled back, dropped the gun, clutching his face, completely thrown off by the hit and the surprise. Without missing a beat, his wife darted forward and grabbed the gun. Meanwhile, he just stood there, frozen, like he was watching a movie happen in front of him. The guy, realizing the tables had turned, backed off fast and disappeared into the woods before they could really do anything. Then they noticed the woman was gone. They panicked at first, thought she'd run off again. But they found her curled up inside his wife's tent, hugging her knees like she was trying to disappear inside herself. It was honestly heartbreaking. She was shaking like crazy. Not from cold, they all knew that, but from pure terror. And truthfully, all of them were a little terrified too. He knew they couldn't stay there. That guy could come back any second, maybe not alone this time. They asked her if it was just him or if there were others, but she couldn't answer. At that point, he told his wife and friend to stay with her while he went looking for cell signal. He grabbed a flashlight and started walking. Hiking through the woods at night is easily one of the most surreal things you can do. The forest sounds different after dark. Every little crack or rustle sounds like footsteps. He kept imagining the guy trailing him through the trees. They'd left the gun with the girls for protection. He only had a small knife. So yeah, every shadow looked like danger, every sound a threat, but he kept going. He knew he had no choice if they wanted to get out of that situation. With a little luck, and after climbing a small ridge, he finally got a weak signal, just enough to call for help. The call dropped twice, but he managed to give them their coordinates and say they needed help, that there might be a criminal in the woods with them. Then he made his way back, and they waited on high alert, jumping at every snap of a twig in the dark. The rescue team showed up before sunrise. They took all of them straight to the hospital. The woman, of course, needed medical attention. The rest of them were just in shock. That's when they finally learned more. She was Canadian, had been missing for over 2 months. Her family had given up hope of finding her alive. Turns out she'd been held in awful conditions for weeks. The guy who came after her, her ex, also Canadian, had snapped after she'd broken things off. He crossed the border, followed her across states, and somehow managed to isolate her in the wilderness for weeks. A full-on nightmare. Thankfully, the story had a somewhat okay ending. She survived. She was going to recover, and the guy was caught a few days later, but something in them changed. They came so close to something tragic. That forest, which had always been their escape, had turned into the setting for something out of a horror movie. They never went back to the Appalachians, not because they were scared. They've done plenty of hikes since in other places, but because that mountain, after that night, just wasn't the same. It felt heavy and dark. Our next story comes from a man who spent a summer working in one of the most isolated jobs imaginable, a fire lookout in the dense wilderness of the Nantahala National Forest. He was seeking solitude, a way to escape the noise of his life. What he found instead was a silence that wasn't empty, but waiting.